Welcome back to another episode of Buckle Up with Simon and Brian, an ultra running conversation. Simon, where is that new buckle at? I can't even see it.
Well, they don't give buckle in European race. However, since you're here and people might have visual, I am a child, so I had to buy myself an Italian buckle. I did that also for Fuji 100, where actually
That's right.
it's
I do
the
remember that.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pizza here, which would also fit for Tour de Geants when you think about it. So that might be a little confusing, but yes, I am still a child in my heart, unfortunately. But yeah, it was absolutely fantastic race. 200 to 230 miles in the Italian Alps, the adventure of a lifetime. But Brian, I'm curious to hear before we dive into any of that, how are your knees?
My knees are well. I'm busy. My kids are busy. School's busy. We got after school sports going on. We're like in the thick of it here. Late September, and I don't see it getting any better. But I do have the
There's
Moab
no hope.
240. I do have the Moab 240 in 2 weeks. So it is also a decent time to be on a little bit of a taper. This coming week, I'll be in Colorado Springs with the USCA coaching conference, running coaching conference for 4 days. I'll be there Thursday through Sunday, rubbing elbows with all the big professional coaches in the space. So that's always fun and a good time. I'm hoping to learn a lot. I'll be hanging with my buddy from Cocodona, Thomas, my crew guy, and he paced the last 20 miles. I'll be at Thomas's house for the weekend, and yeah, knees are doing well. That's my short story, not much. But you, Simon, on the other hand, I think we jumped the gun on the beginning. The buckle reference is for the Tour de Geants, the Tour of Giants, 330 kilometers around some major mountains in Italy. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's been for me the dream racer. A lot of people, for example, they will have read Born to Run, and from that they will have learned about Leadville, and then Leadville is like their dream race. Like someday they want to race that, or maybe they've read Can't Hurt Me with David Goggin, and they're like, Bad Water is the race I want to do someday. That's the long term objective. Well, for me, that objective has always been Tour de Géants, hardcore mountain race, crazy elevation change. It's Ure 100. I've always talked about it being the hardest race I've ever done. And Tour de Géants, basically, you multiply that by two, just to give you a frame of reference of how much the climbs are relentless, steep, nonstop, all the time, and huge. It's quite something, and I'm very proud I was able to finish that. But we had a few curveballs thrown at us. We didn't have the best weather condition, and that made probably for interesting stories, I think, or badass story, I think.
we're going to dive right into that conversation here, but we do need to back up even farther, just 1 second, and introduce Leanne Bauer. She's been on the show before. She did a couple episodes. She interviewed me with you about my story, and now we bring Leanne back on to interview you about the Tour de Geants, your experience, start to finish, your big European trip this summer, and all the things related. Nora's injury, and we kind of dive deeper into it all. And so, a big thanks to Leanne for coming in short notice and asking all great questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's always great to have Leanne on the show. I mean, she's such a lovely friend, and we just finished the interview, right? And she's really good at making you feel comfortable. And it really felt this conversation we just had. We're just friends talking about what have you been up to, and having the three of us kind of having this discussion. I think makes for a really good flow. And of course, I really appreciate that she would take the time for that. To help us this conversation for all of our audience. So thank you, Leon. Much appreciated, and much appreciated the time we spent together around Leadville this summer.
Yeah, let's get right into that conversation. It's a great one. Thanks for sharing it, Simon. Again, thanks to Leanne for coming on short notice. Um, Thanks for listening. If you are listening and or watching, please share, like, and tell your friends about the podcast. We'd love to get 28 people listening.
And go to my YouTube page, watch the movie in a few weeks.
Yep, we have more information about that at the end of the episode, so stay tuned. Without further ado, here's Simon at the Tour de Geants. Hey, thanks for joining us, Leanne, on short notice and helping us decipher Tour de Geants with Simon.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you back. We always bring you when we want to have softball question for a sensitive interviewee, which will be me today.
We're just glad you made it back in one piece after your very, very busy and long season.
Yeah, seriously, I was kind of worried out there a little bit, especially with my beautiful and lovely Nora hurting herself just before. I kept thinking, oh man, that would be a disaster trip if we managed to both get injured in the same vacation. So yeah, I'm glad to be back alive and in one piece.
So let's dissect that a little bit, Simon. You mentioned that Nora got an injury when you were doing the tour of Mont Blanc. I'm going to mix up these tours all night long here on this episode. But you were doing the tour of Mont Blanc. You were doing it solo, unsupported, together as a couple. And let's kind of go. Maybe we'll start there with your European trip. Sure, and how that go for you.
Yeah, we went solo as a couple.
Something like that. A duo.
But yeah, we went for the Tour du Mont Blanc, which is not exactly the same as UTMB in terms of where you go, but it's pretty similar. It's just this really famous hiking trip, 100-mile in the Alps around the Mont Blanc Massif or Monte Bianco Massif. Really, really epic. And actually, Leanne and Mark will be doing it next year, which is super exciting. And we'll have tips for you guys on what to do and what not to do for sure. But yeah, it was something that was really exciting. It's the first time that Nora and I travel abroad, except going to Canada to see my family. And we've known each other for 6-7 years. So that was very special. And it starts beautifully, nice weather, nice half day of hiking. It was perfect. And then the next morning she hurt herself, and that kind of derailed a little bit what we were doing. But the cool thing with Mont Blanc is that it's not like the US. There's like towns everywhere, and you can just go from one place to the other by public transit or public transport. So that's what we ended up doing to a large extent, and still having a good experience and making the most out of it. Of course, it sucks that she's injured, and obviously she's not magically healed. She's still dealing with that right now and on the road to recovery. But still a cool adventure to be together in Europe. It was fun, but could have been more fun a little bit.
Do you have plans to go back and complete the circle with her?
Yeah, I mean, we told each other we would. There's been a lot of crying and disappointment and pain, and we said, look, like, this sucks, but we're gonna come back. Reality is, it's not so simple to just go fly to Europe. It's not the cheapest thing ever. It also takes a lot of time, but we'll make that a priority to go back someday and not just finish it, but do the whole thing in one go. And now that we've been there and we know it, I think it will be a little easier logistic wise to plan that. Not that it was so complicated, but it will make it just that little bit easier in understanding what to do, what not to do. And there's certain things that now we just know. Now we just know where we can leave our bag. Now we just know where to fly. Flying to Geneva, by the way, is the secret. Fly to Geneva, take a bus to Les Houches or to Courmayeur, and then take it from there. And we know that. So now it's just about booking the gîte or the refugio to where you're gonna sleep, and that's it. So we'll try. But it'd be nice also if a sponsor wants to contribute. We would love that.
Do you have any Do you have any sponsors you want to shout out to, Simon?
Yeah, McDonald. No, but for realsy, yeah, people that have contributed not financially to the past trip, but to both Tour du Mont Blanc and Tour de Geants equipment. Ultraspire, we had the CEO once on one of our episodes. I think it's a fantastic team, fantastic product. I needed a bag that was not just a running vest, but a little bit bigger. I think, Leanne, you have the same, the Epic 3. Perfect bag for something like that. It's not as big as a backpacking bag, but it's bigger than a running vest. So it was kind of the good in between, where even in Tour de Géants, I could just put extra stuff in there. We had snowstorm. Here you go. I put crampons and it's fitting no problem. Also tailwind. That's really what we were fueling a lot during the tour. And also just they have this recovery mix, which is also with protein. That was perfect in the evening. We knew we would have food, but we didn't know what it would be and if there would be enough protein. So having that mix was just kind of really clutch. And I was running with Hoka shoes, which I always love. They give me a little bit blisters, but other than that, they were great.
Simon, so for the listener that isn't in our smaller little circle of text threads and everything, Nora did severely sprain her ankle. She's on the mend. I think the picture I saw, it looked like a small eggplant, I'd maybe call it. And
That's kind of sexualized. Call it the grapefruit, maybe. I don't know.
Well, the color was eggplant as well. I mean, it had striations and stuff in it. That's what that's the eggplant reference. Not
okay. Thank you.
Not a male organ by any means. It did not look like a male organ.
Like actually hurting a ligament or tearing a ligament, or is it just a severe?
Yeah, the diagnostic from the doctor is it's a tear or multiple tears. He couldn't tell the difference. No need for surgery, and even not necessarily recommend to have PT. Just doing exercise and staying active. But yeah, a tear, not just a sprain. So yeah.
Poor Nora.
All right. Well,
get better soon, Nora.
Heal up, Nora. We'll be back out there pacing.
I need a pacer. Like, this is a disaster, guy. My pacer is hurt. Let's think about the priorities here.
All right, so you get to Tour Mont Blanc, and it kind of falls apart on day 2. So what do you do with the extra time that you have? That you were supposed to be still on the trail moving.
Yeah, exactly. So the way it works when you do a tour like that is that you have place you're going to stay every night, and it's booked in advance. So what we did, so day 1, we were fine. Day 2, that's when she injured herself, and we pushed to the next place. We could have taken a bus earlier, but it's hard to tell how bad something is when it's something like that. And the day it happened, it's painful, but you're still able to walk on it. So we taped it, with a stretchy thing so that it wouldn't swell too much. But as soon as she fell down, she was behind me. I heard it, and the scream that she had was not a typical one. It was clearly something is wrong. And as soon as we removed her shoes, poop, I was swelling. So we knew I was injured, but we didn't know how much. So we still made it all the way to Les Houches. So we had done a solid 40 miles by then. Then the next day, she wanted to try anyway. I think we were still hoping that it wouldn't be too bad. Personally, I had little hopes, but I felt, let's give it a go. So we went a little bit. Eventually, she said, I can't do that. I need to go down and take the train. And we split way for that one. So that one, since we were already engaged, I decided, okay, I'm just going to go myself. You can take the train. We'll meet there. Then we'll regroup. And there we decided to both together take the train to the next one. And the final day, so we were doing it in 4.5 days. The final day, huge storm, crap weather. And I was like, look, this is not going to be fun, but I need to go and test my gear in the Alps when you have shit weather like this, because the weather forecast was getting worse and worse for Tour de Geants. And I was wondering, do I have enough gear actually? What's the condition in the mountain? So I went with zero expectation of it being fun. It was not fun. But it was a really good kind of, not a wake-up call, but it was good because I could tell pretty quickly, wow, like my rain jacket is not cutting it with these weathers. And even though at the time they didn't forecast snow for Tour de Géants, I could feel in the air that 1 or 2 degree difference and it's snow, and that could happen at high altitude. So I felt, okay, there's a need for crampons or micro spikes also. So we got that. And that turned out that these 2 things, buying a new rain jacket that was a little thicker and the micro spike, totally saved my race. I would have been disqualified actually if I didn't have the micro spikes, because they had them mandatory at some point. So it turned out that this kind of bad day on the Tour du Mont Blanc really changed everything for the better. I also got sick, and that has dragged like a cold or flu on that last day, and that has been dragging. I'm finally getting better, but that wasn't great also.
So you're at 4.5 days. You go test your gear. You figure out you need some micro spikes and a new shell. It's a good reality check, and you move on. You get those things. You're feeling a little under the weather. What's the timeline between the end of the tour?
It was
Mont
like
Blanc
2 days.
and the start of Tour de Geants.
It was like 2 days, and we also had family coming over. So we have Nora's parents that were arriving on that last day of Tour du Mont Blanc. So we met up with them and we spent some time with them. I also had my sister that was there. So those 2 days were really about relaxing, prepping for the race. So doing the check-in and all of these things for me and for them, just walking around, which it was great because I think, when I was racing for a week, if Nora had been by herself injured, I think that would have been kind of a miserable period. But the fact that she was with family and my sister, that was perfect. Then they could take it a little bit easier. And like we said, Nora with a sprained ankle and her parents, it's like, it's matching. It's the right level actually to enjoy, little walks, but not too much. So it was kind of perfect timing.
How did your body feel after doing, as much of the Tour de Mont Blanc as you did, and then having this big race 2 days later?
I mean, you know me, I always do a little too much, I think. And when I did Tour du Mont Blanc, I was not necessarily running that much, like some of the downhill, some of the flat, but mostly just hiking and then doing an average of 20, 25 a day. So I was totally fine, really. You have a good bed, you eat a lot, and you have nothing else to do. That was totally fine. And I felt also, in terms of jet lag, I was getting pretty used to it by the end. So like it was a good adjustment period. At first, Nora was, when I decided to do Tour de Geants, that's Nora's idea to do Tour du Mont Blanc. And she was worried I would think, well, that's too close to Tour de Geants, I can't do it. But that was not the case. That was actually perfect to get used to it, to get used to trail there, to test my equipment, to get used to the time zone. So it was absolutely not a problem. In fact, I think it was beneficial.
Great.
So it's let's start with Tour de Geants now and kind of go into that. I got a bunch of questions, but maybe some facts, or at least the stuff that's on the internet, and you can let us know what is not factual.
So
Tour de
facts
Geants
on the internet. Do you mean like on Wikipedia page or like actual facts?
Not Wikipedia specifically. I was thinking more of the Tour 330 site. So Tour de Geants is a Tour of the Giants translated. So it's big high mountain passes. It's 330 kilometers or 205 miles. I think you logged a few more, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think you logged a few more on your Strava. It says it's got 24,000 meters of elevation gain, which is 78,700 feet in our U.S. equation here. And it races through the Aosta Valley, and it's considered one of the most difficult in the world. It features 25 mountain passes, and they range between 6,600 feet at their peaks in the high points. And so so is that pretty accurate to what you got? Again, the mileage is probably off.
I mean, except the mileage and the elevation gain. Yeah, and I think it's important to say it's a 200 miler, but it's one of these historical 200 miler, and it's a mountain 200 miler. Like you're up there in the mountain. It's closer to not mountaineering necessarily, but definitely like fast packing than a pure 200 miler where people are running. The pros, I think Francois, who won this year, probably did around 70 hours. Whereas if you would compare to some of the 200 miler in the US that are not mountain race, there they do closer to a 50 hour. So it's a huge difference. And that accounts for the huge elevation gain, but also it becomes pretty technical. Some of these mountain pass, like you can't run the uphill, obviously, because I'm weak, but you cannot run the downhill either because you're going to hurt yourself for sure. And, but Yeah, an absolute classic. And one of the things that it will not be said online is that that's actually the first ultra marathon I ever heard of. When I lived in Europe for my PhD, I had a girlfriend that lived in Italy. Well, that was from Italy, and they had a summer house in Cogne, which is one of the life bays in Valle d'Aosta. And then you had all of these runner at some point that came during when we were on vacation there. I was like, what are these hikers or jogger doing? I didn't know any better back then. And she was like, oh yeah, it's this like cool race, Tour de Geants. And it was a little newer back then. Like now it's been, I don't know, 10, 15 years, but back then it was definitely newer. So there were less runner. And I was like, wow, that's ridiculous. But here you go. A few years later, I'm racing it and completing it, which is pretty cool. That was kind of the dream race for me from a very, very long time ago, a race that I never felt I would be capable of doing. So I was really excited to race it, but also very nervous.
I'm curious, since now in this year you've completed a desert 200 plus race and now a mountain 200 plus race. What are your thoughts on the difference between those?
Yeah, I mean, it's two totally different things, right? The Cocodona 250 would be the other one. It's 50 more miles, but I took, I think, 35-hour less to run 50 more miles. And that really shows how big the difference is in terms of elevation gain and technicality. And one of the big difference I've noted was the one in Italy. You had aid station almost every 3, 4, 5 miles. Very common aid station. It would still take you a while, but it's just 3, 4, 5 miles with sure like 5,000 feet of gain. Whereas Cocodona, sometimes you would go 20 miles without seeing anything, which is very different. And when you're remote over there. When you're going, the Crown King at the beginning of the race, you're really in the middle of freaking nowhere. If something bad happens, it's just too bad. They had some of the water stations, someone had stolen it or something. There's nothing they can do about it. Whereas over there, if there would be a problem with the aid station, there's no food, you would just go to the restaurant. Like that's
Mhm.
fine. Like it's interesting how much more civilized it was. But it was also much more technical, and I think that really changed also the strategy that you have to have when it comes to sleeping. In the Italian one, in Tour de Geants, you needed to be awake. You can't just be hallucinating and finding it cute or funny. Like you can do that in Cocodona. In the middle of the race, you're basically on the road. So it's kind of okay to push past your limit of what you needed in terms of sleeping. Whereas when you're climbing these high mountain passes, especially in the middle of a snowstorm, it's a little bit more unforgiving. So you have to have your wits, you have to have a good judgment, and then because of that, you have to take better care of yourself and really not be sleepwalking. For example, as soon as I felt, while I'm really getting tired, then I would say, okay, I'm going to sleep at the next aid station. Like that's much better. The temperature shift also were pretty big, so I felt that nighttime was a good time to sleep, and daytime you really got to push for it. So if I would come at an aid station where there's a sleep like a bed station in the middle of the day, I would skip it because I want to maximize my daytime mileage and minimize my nighttime mileage as much as possible. Also for the views, honestly, but mostly for safety.
You're minimizing the nighttime hours because of the temperature drop, right? So it was almost too cold to be efficient,
Yeah,
or
and
in that realm.
yeah, it's cold and it's technical sometimes, and especially the first 24 hour, we got a lot of rain. It got really slippery, wet, kind of technical condition. And I think that's the kind of thing that when you're in daytime, you can more easily gauge if a rock is going to be slippery. Whereas I feel nighttime, sometimes it's a little bit harder to say, is this rock just darker or it's wet and slick? Is it muddy? You can't really tell as much. So it's a little bit harder to like gauge your speed. So I felt more confident doing it during the day. That was also a big factor for me.
Was the trail, could you take dirt naps if you wanted to, or was it just way too technical and the weather wouldn't allow it?
It depends where. There's places you could do it. In fact, I took a dirt nap and I lost one of my bottles there, so the cows must be very happy. But the shift in temperature between you're down in the valley to you're up in the mountain pass is so big that I don't think anyone would want to sleep too much at the pass. You would always go lower. But as soon as you get lower, then you're close to a town. So you're probably you're close to an aid station. So you'd probably sleep there anyway. But there's a couple of times where I did it. And usually it's more when I do my like 5 minute, I close my eyes and then I'm kind of reset for an hour or so, which is enough to get to the next aid station and then sleep for real, for a real powerful sleep, like 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
So Nora's visiting with family. You're out on the trail. Was that by design? I mean, obviously she's injured, so she wouldn't have been able to help you out this particular race. But I believe that there's no crew and no pacers, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
It's partly correct. There's no pacing. I think that's true for almost any European race. Like pacing is very much a US thing, which is funny because I feel that compared to Cocodona, like people have a pacer and it's great. And sometimes they ask them to mule, which should totally not be okay. But you don't really need a pacer. It's just really nice to have. Whereas that I feel on some of these mountain paths where you need good judgment, it can become a little bit more dangerous, and a pacer could have been a good safety measure, but they don't allow for pacer. As for crewing, yeah, you can kind of have, but there's places at aid station that they won't even be allowed anyway. So it's really restricting how much they can help. And one of the factors also that made it not as needed, one of the difficulty I found at Cocodona racing solo was that you have drop bags at different aid station, and usually my drop bag will help me do the shift between daytime and nighttime, or when the condition change very much. So if you're in the desert, I want kind of more light clothing, and when you're up in the mountain, I want something that is warmer. But I only have one puffy jacket, I only have one rain jacket, so I can't just distribute it in different drop bag. And because of that, and because we had different day and night cycle, in the end, I had to just carry everything the whole way. But at Tour de Geants, you have this huge yellow duffel bag, and you can put a bunch of crap in there, and they're going to carry your bag from one life base to the other. So it's about 50 kilometers. You'll see it. And usually 50 kilometers for someone like me will be about half a day to a full day. So that's really helping you, like, if you only have one. And in fact, it wouldn't have been possible when you think about it. I had micro spikes in there, which turned out that at some point they said if you don't have micro spike, you cannot continue. I only have the one pair, and I don't know when it's going to be snowy, but since they're just in the bag, then you can pick them at the right time. Whereas at Cocodona, that's not something that would have been possible. But if you have a crew, they will have that kind of equipment, that kind of, you only have one pair and they will give it to you. Same thing with things like a toothbrush. I was able to brush my teeth every time I was at the sleep station. Like, it's a nice quality of life bonus. I'm not going to buy 6 toothbrush to put in 6 different drop bag, but this I could just do. And that made it much better.
That's very efficient.
Yeah.
Race planning. Other than that, what else were the differences between like a European 200 versus an American 200?
I think there were a lot of differences, but it's funny that you say it's efficient, because it's true. It's efficient, and I don't understand why we don't do it. But they were not efficient about everything. And it was funny how complicated check-in was. And I remembered having seen Jeff Speltier's movie about Tour de Geants. He was complaining that the check-in took him maybe 6 hours. And I was like, that's not possible. And it turns out he was kind of accurate about it. It just takes forever. Very, not disorganized, but it was just kind of you have to live it to understand the frustration. But other than that, I think the race was really well organized and the volunteers were great. The big difference, and I mentioned it before, it's kind of interesting how much the race was all about, you're in a town or a small village, and then there's this huge mountain pass, then you go down to another town or village that is really close by, and then you hop on that several times and you have a small refugio. As opposed to the US, you're kind of much more remote. Just the wildlife that you will see there. I mean, you don't see wildlife in the Alps. Like, at best, maybe a marmot or something like that, but you're much, much more likely to see a bunch of cows and some farmer or something, which is something in and of itself too. And I think I was lucky. I didn't kind of actively think about it before racing that, but I speak French. And over there in Valle d'Aosta, sure, it's in Italy, so Italian is the main language, but French is I think is also an official language in that region. And if not, I would say half of the Italian there speak at least some level of French. And of course, there's a lot of Europeans, so a lot of them were French, some were German, but that really helped me communicate with many more people. And the contrast that I can see is when I went and raced in Japan, where I wouldn't understand anyone. I feel that you guys might be closer to that if you go there. Like some people would speak English, but not all of them. And whereas my French would help, and if not, my my Italian, and I'm quoting a little bit, which is basically me adapting my French, is actually helpful. So that was interesting. The other thing that was,
I thought you just say it with an Italian accent. I thought you just say the
yeah,
American
that's what you
word
do.
with
I mean,
because
it's not even a joke.
That's
like,
it, right?
It works. It works. You think if I have no clue how to communicate something, I try in French, I try in English, they don't understand. I'll take the French word and I'll Italianize it, like adding a vowel at the end and say it a little bit with the way they're talking, like with the melody. And very often they would say, I was like, yes, exactly, bravo. And then everyone is happy because we understand each other. But yeah, people were super friendly, and you could really tell that people in town were very proud of the race. And I think that's something that sometimes you see in the US, but sometimes you see like people being annoyed with the disturbance in their town, whereas over there they were just so excited, so happy to help. It was really great, actually. Aid station are a little different, but that's always like that. I think if you go in a new country.
Simon, if I didn't run, I'd be like the fat kid. I love food, so I want to know about the aid station food compared to
Me
like
too.
Cocodona food.
Well, Cocodona is a bad example because Cocodona was really good, right? I mean, they had full meal and they had variety. All of these aid station had pretty much the same thing, but were very well furnished. They all had pasta with tomato, so pomodoro. If you don't know how to say tomato in Italian, it's not tomato. So pomodoro, and then with cheese. But they would always have like a plate of different cheese, not just Parmesan, but a lot of different options, cold meat. They always had soup. So it was really interesting. And the funny thing is how much you would think the pasta is the go-to, and that's what I did a lot, but I don't think that's the best. The best is the soup, especially when it's snowing. It really hits the spot, and then you put a bunch of cheese in it with the fat and the protein. It was really, really, really good, and really good in the sense that it could help you sustain a long-lasting race. You didn't have so much, or I didn't find it myself, more like a sport kind of food. So I didn't find gel. Maybe they had some sometimes, but when I asked, they said, no, we don't have, or gummies. Usually they didn't have that. They didn't have, say, Tailwind or Gatorade or whatever energy drink you would have. They had electrolytes sometimes, but not even always. So it's much more real food, much less sports food, which if it was a shorter distance race, I would be a little annoyed by that myself. Annoyed is not the word, but more like, oh man, this is not what I need. But for a longer race like that, that was perfect, especially for these, they call it life base, which is where you have a much bigger aid station. That's where you have your drop bag. You always have a huge room with sleeping station. Then you get a real meal. You go to bed, you wake up, you have a real meal again, and then you go. And I think that's perfect for kind of not degrading physically, because that's usually what you do in a race. You start in perfect shape and you just kind of go downward until you cross that finish line totally destroyed. Whereas for that, it felt like you have the nutrients to keep going. And I'm sure that if I had needed to go 2 more days, I would have been able to do that. Probably. I mean, I don't know, actually. Nothing to say. If the weather had been good, I could have done 2 more days. How about that one? that is true.
With all this cheese and meat, you're saying it's probably going to be difficult if you're a plant-based athlete.
That is a good question. Yeah, I guess the pasta were okay.
I was going to say, I bet you do the pomodoro. I think you do the pasta and and the tomato sauce.
But you're right. That would be fairly limited, I think. Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, man. I'm sorry, Leanne.
Okay.
She's out. She's out.
She's out. Carry a lot of gels. Just kidding.
Yeah. Which again, like, because you have your huge drop bag, is actually not so hard. And I had that. Like, I had in my bag a bunch of Tailwind, which I mentioned before, that I threw in there. So the fact that they didn't have a sports drink, I was able to deal with it. I put like I actually don't know how many pouch I had in there, but I put the shit ton. And then once I realized that, every time I would go there, I would grab 3 or 4 for the next
Mm-hmm.
day, and that would be sufficient to move forward. So it's a little easier than if you have like 15 different drop bags and you need to be like, I need 3 gel there, 1 gel here. Like you can just you put a bunch, and depending how your stomach is doing, you just take what you feel you'll be able to consume in the next 20 hours.
Simon, it's a looped course or is it out and back?
It's a big ass loop. You go counterclockwise, big ass loop, where you go so far. At some point, we were on the mountain pass. Then you climb on the ridge, and you look to the right, and I was like, shit, like this is the end. The Alps are over. This is the plain, and you see Italy, and it really felt like Hannibal. I just crossed the freaking Alps, and now I'm gonna invade the plains in Italy. And of course, then we turned north, and then we didn't have the opportunity to run on flat. But it really felt so epic, and I was lucky enough to arrive there when it was daytime, so I could really see super far away. It was a beautiful day, and it really felt like, wow, like, all right, like now we turn around, now we come back. So that was absolutely epic.
Wow.
Leanne did some homework on Wikipedia, and I think she could maybe answer these questions. How many started? How many finished this year's race, Leanne?
I found 1,100 participants, and it's about a 60% completion rate. And
I don't believe that for this year. Really?
Huh?
I would have said 50%, but
50%. Yeah, I think the 60 was kind of like on average over the years, kind of. But I don't know the exact number this year.
Yeah.
Didn't really.
And Simon, there's
but
other events
right for the field, like the 1,100. That sounds really right, because we had a 2-wave start, and the wave I was in was the major wave. I feel the second wave was much smaller, but it was huge. I think that's the biggest race I did, except maybe Fuji. But Fuji, you had like 5 different waves, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But yeah, it was huge. But even within 24 hours, I think what I heard is you had already 100 or 200 people within 24 hours that had dropped, because the weather was just abysmal. In the first 24 hour, it was just raining, cold, muddy, technical crap. And it really gets into your head, because you're thinking, and I was thinking, I cannot do this for 5 days. Like, I cannot be this cold and this miserable for 5 days. And the only reason I was able to keep going, other than being really, really stubborn, was that I had hopes that it would get better. And it did get better. If it had not, I really don't know.
I was surprised to find, because this race started in 2010, and within the history of the years, there's been people who have passed away on the course, and they've had to cancel the race like mid-race many years just because of weather-related issues and that kind of thing. So it's very hardcore.
Yeah, and like it's not like technical like your mountain climbing. Like I've definitely done some peaks in Colorado that were like class 3, class 4, that is way more hardcore. But in the context that you haven't slept in 4 days much, it's easier to make these mistakes. I think the guy that passed away, we were talking about that with someone. My understanding is it was not even in a technical place. He tripped, he hit his head, and he died, unfortunately, which is very sad. But I don't think that was necessarily to it being the most technical. Like, it's not he tumbled down the mountain.
It was it was a complete accident, and it's an unfortunate accident, but it was an accident nonetheless.
Yeah, like,
and it wasn't
kind of like
it wasn't a terrain issue or anything.
Yeah, like a freak accident. Like, you can die tripping in your bathtub and hitting your head, and like that's it. Like, it's very unfortunate, and it can happen, and it's a good reminder that these races are pretty serious. You know, trail running people have died, but I think this one was not necessarily on the organization. And the bad weather, though, when I got caught in my snowstorm, and I'm jumping ahead maybe, but the last night, huge snowstorm. I mean, we're from snowy place, so let's not call it huge snowstorm, but let's call it a snowstorm. It was pretty bad. Like, I did not expect it, and the volunteers really got they got the information wrong to me. Either they didn't know and they just told me bad information, or it changed very drastically. But my understanding is that it was a very localized storm. So we were probably, I don't know, like 20, 40, 60 guys that were caught up doing that mountain pass. And we got, I don't know, like this much snow, like a feet of snow, which isn't crazy, but it's not nothing when you're in summer gear. But if that had been on a bad mountain pass that was very technical with that wind, that would have been super dangerous. But we were lucky that it was a good mountain pass, not so technical. And looking at other peaks after when the day came back, I'm pretty sure we were like the unlucky people. There was snow in other peaks, but it was not nearly as bad. But I was really worried. First, I felt like maybe they shouldn't have let us go there based on how severe this snowstorm was. But maybe they knew better. But I kept thinking there's a real risk right now that the next mountain pass, which I know is technical, like you have ropes, you have metal kind of ladder or stuff like that. It's possible that it's not passable anymore, and they'll just cancel the race. And that is something, you're right, that has happened in the past, where I think there's a year like 3 people finished because everyone below that was blocked at that mountain pass, and they decided to cancel for safety, which is reassuring a little bit. I knew of that, and it's reassuring that they would take that step, because at the same time, I asked a volunteer just before doing that mountain pass, and I speak French, so I could communicate. What's the condition up there? And it's like, it's passable. I was like, okay, like, how do you know? It's like, well, nobody turned back. I was like, okay, so that's very reassuring, my friend. I don't know if he was joking or not. And then I just went, and it was in fact totally fine. But it felt a little bit like nonchalant, like, yeah, I don't know, just, whatever, dude. I think he also said, you have crampons, right? I was like, yeah, I have crampons. Like, yeah, you'll be fine. I was like, okay. It felt, and we talked about difference between like a race there and a race in the US. I felt in the US, they would have been a little bit more careful because of liability of sending someone up there and not even checking the gear. I saw a guy doing that mountain pass. He actually had microspike according to him, but not on his feet. And he was just sliding all the time. And I was like, dude, I don't want to see you die right now. Like, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, the microspike, are they helping? I was like, yeah, they're very helpful. Like, don't you have any? He was like, oh yeah, I have some. Why are you not using them? Like, it felt like he was lying to me, and I didn't want to pressure test, because they did force you to have microspike, leaving that life base. They said, okay, like, do you have winter gear, like winter clothing? Do you have microspikes? But they never took the step of show me. They just ask, and you say, yeah, I do. And it was like, all right, take care. If the mountain pass is not passable, please come back and tell me. If you die, please text me before so I can let other people to know. So it felt nonchalant, but in the end, like, the information was absolutely correct. So I have no hard feeling, but the way he said it was not reassuring.
He had way more confidence in you than you'd had in him.
That is correct. He was like, you'll be fine, Simon. Don't worry about it. I know you. You'll be fine. And the reality, it did not feel sketchy at all. That is something that really surprised me. The second to last mountain pass, the one that was at night, the conditions were super sketch. Like, I was not happy being up there, and it really felt, I cannot stop moving right now, otherwise I'll be super cold. And with the wind, like, sometimes I had to crouch down because I felt that I was being blown away a little bit. It felt a little bit sketchy. But that second mountain pass with microspike, it was like the perfect texture that it almost felt like you had big boots with big magnet and you're sticking to the ground. And like, I was absolutely not concerned that I was going to slide down. It felt safer than in normal conditions. So
Sure.
So he was absolutely correct. Did he freak me out? Yes. Is that part of the game? Yes, that's fine. Am I complaining for no reason? Yes, maybe. But yeah, it was a good experience in the end.
You mentioned it earlier about cows, and I saw a reel about cows. as well. I don't know if I got the full effect of it, and maybe I didn't know the context of it. So give us the context of the cows and what the situation was, and why were they
Yeah, if
annoying
you've,
you or something?
I feel that's like an Alp or European thing. If you've ever hiked there or trail run there, like you're very used to cows there everywhere, and they love being on the trail, not next to the trail, especially when there's like no room to go somewhere else. And cows are not aggressive at all, but they're big, and like you're really wondering, like, dude, can you please move? Like, I don't want to be sharing the trail with you. And they really don't care at all. So we saw cows a bunch of time, but and at first you're always excited, like, oh, there's some cows, but eventually you have encounters that are much closer. There was one where we were climbing pretty high in the mountain. We were above tree line, and we started seeing some cows in the distance. I even saw a cow that like looked at me first, and then I took out my camera, and then like he or she started kind of climbing and really struggling, like climbing, falling down, climbing, falling down, and then turning to me, almost saying like, "Dude, I hope you were not filming this." I was like, "Oh, sorry, I'm gonna share it with all of my friends now." Um, and then the pack, and I mean they left that one behind, so hopefully that cow is okay. But the pack was kind of further along, and they were kind of like looking for the way. It's like I don't know what they were doing, so we were able to kind of zigzag between them. But as soon as we did that, it felt like they thought we were the shepherds or whatever, and then they were really following us. Like they were like right on our ass. And they have these bells, which also, by the way, sounds always like you have an aid station coming up. You hear all the bells. It's like, aid station. I was like, no, it's just cows. But anyway, they were right behind us, and it felt like they were almost running after you. And it's like, oh shit, we gotta go faster. We gotta go faster. But we made it to the mountain pass together, and it was one of the prettiest mountain pass that we had. Was really kind of a cool timing. And you had all of the cows. They love these trail markers. I don't know if it feels good on their gum, but they were on the video. There's really only one that has it, but I would say that they pretty much all of them stole one at some point and were just chewing on it and just having such a great time doing that. Which of course makes you wonder, like when I was in the night in the mountain storm, in the snowstorm, and I couldn't see anything, I could at least see the reflection of the marker with my headlamp. And I kept thinking, God, I hope I'm not walking towards cow poo, which could have been the case because they eat them and then they poop them somewhere. I was like, man, am I getting totally lost in the mountain following cow poop somewhere? Turned out I was okay, but it could have been the case, you know? It makes you wonder. Could happen. Yeah, and you have to go with confidence with these cows. Like it feels, and I don't know if you've run with horses, but it was kind of similar than that when I did Vermont 100, and you had a horse kind of running the race with us, and sometimes we passed them. And at first, it's kind of intimidating. You're like, I'm not used to neither cows or horses, and you're wondering, like, is there a risk that the horse will kind of kick me in the face when I pass him? So you try to communicate at least with the rider, and they decide if it's safe or not. But the cows, they're just hanging out. There's no one around them, so you're really wondering, like, am I encroaching? Like, are you, because they look at you also. There's no TV. They have nothing else to do but to eat their grass and look at you and stare at you from very far. And you're wondering, am I pissing him off? Like, I'm walking on his dinner right now. So yeah, but no incident.
That's good. I'm curious, of all those days and nights you spent out there, what was the funniest memory that happened that you can remember?
Oh man, fun, yes. Oh, that's a positive. I think I should have said the cow stuff for sure. Dang it. I don't think it's the funniest, but one of the key moments, it was both happy and unhappy, but you always kind of go back and forth with some people. And there was someone that I thought was way behind, and actually we want to interview her. I thought she was way behind me, but then someone told me like she had passed me. And in a random refugio, super small, like that was probably the smallest. There were some beds, and I thought there was no one. So like I filmed the beds and I was fine. And I talked with the people and I'm about to go. And then she just pops up and like she's there. I was like, oh, like cool. Like I thought you were like behind. I thought you were struggling. She was struggling at that time though, but she kind of made it. And it always feels good to see that the people you raced with actually make it to the end. Like I get, as soon as I get attached to someone, I get worried about them. And as soon as you don't see them anymore, because we go back and forth a lot, and then you just don't see them anymore, you're wondering, like, maybe they dropped, maybe something bad happened, and you're kind of worried. So it felt really good to see her there. That again, she was really struggling there, but she got some help. She made it, and I was like, number one. That was really good.
Simon, what was the? I'm stealing one of Leanne's questions here, but what was one of the biggest unexpected surprises that you encountered? Something that just threw you off.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it. The snow was definitely. I did not expect it before the trip. Then I did my hike in Tour du Mont Blanc. I was like, maybe that's a risk. And it's more associated to that. And if anyone is ever racing it, just bring your freaking micro spike and bring winter gear, because the surprise was more that it became mandatory. So for me, that's surprising that in a race you would have gear. And maybe I didn't read the manual carefully. I don't know, but I never saw anywhere that at some point they could change the rule and say you cannot keep going unless you have micro spikes. If and maybe it was, and I'm the one who totally is disorganized. Maybe they had said, like, you need to have in your drop bag micro spikes, and if condition change, we might force you to take them. That might be the case, but that has surprised me, and I was lucky to kind of have that foresight. I contacted a few people just before the race, in the 2 days that I mentioned where we were in between Tour du Mont Blanc and Tour de Geants. And I told them, like, dude, I think I'm going to drop. Like, conditions are shit. Like, I don't know what to do. And then I asked Chad, who we had on the podcast before, and he said, oh, yeah, I had micro spikes. I carried them the whole time, never used them. But they had a different year than I had. And in fact, that's the same year Jeff Pelletier did it. And his freaking movie, I love him, by the way, and I love his movie, but I'm pissed off because he said something like, this year at Tour de Geants, we had more people dropping from heat stroke than hypothermia, which is abnormal. And Jeff said, and I'm not complaining about it. And when I was kind of freezing my ass the first day and towards the end, I was like, man, I would love some heat stroke right now. That would feel so warm over me. I was just like freezing all the time. Your lips are blue and there's nothing you can do to warm up. Like you're both sweating because you're going uphill, but at the same time, you're getting cold because it's windy and just like the conditions that are perfect that you can't take care of yourself. So that was a different year for sure. But yeah, so the change in condition was definitely a little bit of a curveball for me, and a difficult curveball to deal with. I'm sure some people dropped because of that.
In a not Wikipedia related search just now, I figured out that it is required to bring a traction device for your shoes, parentheses crampons. So it is in there. Yeah, it is in there. That's not Wikipedia.
I should read the instruction there.
It's not sourced from Wikipedia, just to reiterate that.
Yeah. Well, I trust you. And no, I mean, it's true that it could be there. I definitely focus more on what you were supposed to carry at all time. And like they had things like 2 space blanket. So like I had checked that more than what you put in your main drop bag. But at some point, like it's about judgment too. Like I think I didn't know it was a requirement, but it felt silly to not have some, like enough that I decide I have some micro spikes at home, but I'm gonna burn whatever like the price is to get some right now, because this is for safety and because I might need it. That they require it or not really wouldn't change anything, but that they changed the rule apparently they didn't change the rule, so I'm in the wrong. So Tour de Geants, I'm sorry, I'm the one who's disorganized. I hope you can forgive me. By the way, I love the race. This is probably my favorite race I've ever done. And that's not an exaggeration. That's an adventure of a lifetime. And I couldn't be more grateful for them for giving me that opportunity, and really like everyone that was involved. That was a fantastic race. As much as I love to complain, that's the French in me. we love to complain, but it's because we loved it. And that's very much how I feel about the race.
So with all that being said, if you were to do it again, what are some things that you would do differently?
Yeah. I mean, that is one of my questions, huh?
We're just stealing each other's questions.
Yeah.
So great question, by the way. First, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask myself, that's ridiculous, guys.
I'm gonna edit all this out, so don't worry.
Oh, yeah, you can definitely leave it in. One of the reasons I think this is a great question is first, like, do I want to do it again? It's kind of question number one, and I feel it's the kind of race that the condition of the race would totally change your experience. So I would be compelled to actually race it again. At the same time, if I go back in the area, we have a full week of racing, I might do Swiss 360 before repeating that. And if I'm going to do it again, then Tour de Geants now does another race, which is called Tour des Glaciers, which is 450 kilometers instead of 330, which is funny because, like the description said, Tour de Geants is one of the hardest races in the world. But the answer to, well, what would be even harder happens exactly at the same time. And you see those people, they go on routes that are harder for a longer period of time. So that's something I might want to do someday. I just want to know if it's a little more sketchy or not, because Tour de Geants felt, for me, exactly in the spot of, I never felt unsafe. I never felt this was above my capabilities, but I definitely felt like this is kind of like the ceiling of what I can do and feel good about, and still feel that I'm having fun. It's not always fun, but it's an adventure, and it was fun. Well, that's step number one. Would I do it again? Hey, if they invite me, I will. But there's other stuff I might want to do first. But in terms of things that I would definitely change, I think understanding that the huge life base and those sleep station are the classic place to sleep is great, but there's a lot of other spots that you can sleep, and the best sleep I had was when I decided to not go there and go in other places. It's just harder to know where you will still have a bed, but in the middle of that snowstorm, for example, I was really tired because I couldn't sleep at the life base. I went to another small place, and then you have like 4 beds, 6 bed. It's quiet, it's dark, it's cozy. This is like the perfect spot to sleep. So you could better arrange timing of your sleep. So like, say, go to bed every time like around 4 in the morning, wake up at 6 and keep going, as opposed to feeling the need that you need to sleep at these major aid station. The only advantage of the major aid station is that you have your job bag. So yes, you can rearrange things, brush your teeth, and these sorts of things, but you can do that and still keep going, which is what I would do. It's also when you have like a gymnasium with 150 people sleeping, there's definitely a few of them that will be snoring. There's people that will be talking. It's not as comfortable. I mean, we definitely saw it at Cocodona. Not all of these places were appropriate for sleeping. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault, but it's just the setting is not the same. Whereas in that small cabin in the mountain, it might be easier. The only question is you might not have a spot. But I think in the future, I would kind of probably just do that, honestly.
Wow, it sounds like a great adventure. Something that I'm definitely into. That's kind of like in my wheelhouse, living here in the Rocky Mountains. It has bumped off the top of your list, your A100. So I guess we could finally stop talking about that one. We could talk about Tour de Geants from here on out.
Yes.
So let's back all the way up to the entry process. How did you get into it, and how do you get into it as a potential hopeful of doing this race someday? Do you know the specifics of that?
Yeah, I can't remember the detail, but it's lottery based, and I think you have some like qualification standard, but it's not as prescriptive, say, as Hard Rock, where you have like a very few limited race. Mm-hmm. I think you had to demonstrate probably that you had done a 100-mile race with X amount of elevation change. It was pretty easy, like to the point where I don't remember how I qualified, but I definitely qualified. And anyway, you shouldn't want to do that race if you're not an experienced trail and mountain runner. Like, this should not be your first ultra marathon. This should not be your second ultra marathon. And I would, if you're in the US, I would suggest doing a race like your A100, because essentially Tour de Geants is your A100 times 2. So if you feel that Ure was easy, then go ahead, do it. Of course, you have 6 days instead of 2, so like that there's a difference there, where Ure you always felt a little bit more like the cutoff is right behind you. There, it's only a few hours, whereas Tour de Geants, it feels like, okay, I have like 24 hours before the cutoff catch up to me. So there's that distinction, but like in terms of like what you need to be able to do physically, but also in terms of taking care of yourself, it's pretty similar. Then you put in your name. Can't remember the date specifically. But what I do remember is that I was not in automatically myself. I was on the wait list, but that was very obscure. I'm much more used to, say, like Javelina, for example, the shirt I have. If you're on the wait list, you know that you're spot 257. And from past year, you will know that usually people up to 350 will get in. Whereas this, I didn't even know I was on the wait list. All it said was like some people might be called up later. So I had given up the idea of doing Tour de Geants this year, and I was literally about 24 hours from signing up for Swiss 360. Like I was about to click, like I was just checking the date, about to buy my flights at the same time, and then I get this email that says you're in. I was like, oh, never mind. So that was really close, and I wish they were a little bit more transparent about that. Again, it might be the same thing as the freaking crampon. It might be that I wish I was more organized than them being transparent about it. But I hadn't seen anywhere like the standing for the wait list. But my understanding is that you have about 50 to 30% chance of getting in every year you apply, and I don't think it's necessarily a ticket based system. So I think like it's not like Western State where the longer you apply, the more likely you are to get in. That's not my impression. I think where you're from also matters. So I think I had a higher chance of getting in because I was from Canada as opposed to a bigger country like the US. So if you have dual citizenship, like you might want to strategize a little bit about where you're from. Say you're from Italy. I think that will help.
How has your recovery been since you, I guess tell us about the finish and then what happened after that. Did you
I mean, the
vacation too?
It was so underwhelming, the finish, because pretty much like the whole week you get in town, you get anywhere close to anyone and they're cheering you and they have cowbells and they're making noise, like no matter what time of the day, like you had so many people cheering you. Then I come in Courmayeur for the finish and like I'm just walking in a crowd and like nobody's looking at me almost. And it's like, you guys know that I just like did like more than 300 kilometers. But of course, maybe it's because they've seen that all week. Like I really don't know, but I was like silenced. And eventually closer to the finish line than people were there. But Nora was there. She walked with me to the finish line. I was really happy to see her. It really felt like, it's not like I dedicate this race to Nora, but it felt like I had to finish this. Like I had to finish this to make sure that the trip was not a total waste. Like it sounds silly, and you should really, I think, always, whatever motivation helps you move forward, you should use it. And that was one of them for me. It's like, I cannot let anything prevent me from finishing this. Like I have to finish this because of her injury, because of all of these things. So it felt absolutely fantastic. And recovery has been pretty good. I've been sick, like I've mentioned, like a cold or something. I was coughing the whole race, and I've been coughing last week. And when I met Nora after the race, I found out that she was sick too. So I don't know when we got sick, but it might have been in Tour du Mont Blanc, which, by the way, tip, by back this summer, and when we were there, a bunch of people got a stomach flu from these gîtes. So you got to be careful, actually. Disease do spread like wildfire over there. And that's probably where I got sick from, which definitely did not help Tour de Geants or my recovery. But beyond that, it's pretty similar to Cocodona, and I only have 200 miler under me, but recovery is pretty fast. And I think it's because of the pace. You go slower, you take more care of yourself. Like I felt where I feel that 100 miler, you need to take care of yourself, but towards the end, you kind of need to ignore that and push past that and push, to kind of the limit of breaking your body. I felt that for a 200 miler, you're aiming a little bit more for sustainability. And that was very true for a race that took me 5 days. I had my cycle at some point, I go to bed, I eat, I run. Okay, like let's call it run a little bit, maybe 30 miles for today, 35, 40 miles, go to bed. And it just creates a rhythm that is much more sustainable. So I'm pretty much back to normal, except being sick, and jet lag was an issue, but otherwise I'm totally fine. So already looking at what's the next race. in theory would be Diagonale des Fous towards mid-October. But I might consider adding Saddle 100 if it fits in my work schedule. So we'll see. But I would be able to do it this weekend if it was this weekend. I'm that recovered. So faster than 100 miler for whatever reason.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You're moving at a slower pace. You're getting more calories. You're getting more sleep. It's like a long training week as opposed to an actual race effort that we see in the hundreds, where you're a little more depleted by the end of it, and it takes a little more to bounce back from. So that makes total sense to me.
Plus, you've done so many at this point. You kind of have dialed in how to best take care of yourself and prevent all of those things that can creep up on you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that was true. I wish I was wise beyond my years, but I don't know about that. Like, I think I have like on a larger scope of like a year of racing, like I have ups and I have downs. And like this year, my lowest of the low was around Angeles Crest, so around before Leadville, so early August. I was not doing well, and I really had accumulated fatigue, just being tired, but also my joints were painful, and it really felt like I was digging a hole all the time, like, and I couldn't get out of that. But I was able to slowly creep back up. Like by Leadville, I was doing a little bit better. By Tour du Mont Blanc, I was kind of like back to normal, and that really has helped for me doing Tour de Geants, because I was pooped out. Like Angeles Crest, I was really pooped out. I was falling asleep. I remember the first climb of the race, which maybe it was the second climb. Sorry, it was like 9 a.m. and I was sleepwalking. I was like, yeah, that's not a good sign. Like I'm just, and it's not being sleepy tired. It's just like I'm depleted of energy. Like I have no energy anymore. So I focused a lot in between those like 2-3 months on much more recovery, much less running and training, and just trying to take care of myself. And that it feels it's paying off, and I see the difference, fortunately. Hopefully I don't get in the red as much, but I think it happens when you're kind of pushing your own limit and you're curious about what you can and cannot do. But yeah, it's better now, much better.
Simon, I'm sure you're going to make a movie about it. If you know, when is the premiere, and where can we find it?
Well, I don't know. So my goal will be to. So I'm not sure when this episode will release, but from that episode being released, when you guys can hear this, I hope in a week or two after that, I'll have my Tour du Mont Blanc, and a week or two after that, I'll have my Tour de Geants. I have so much footage, and it's a complex story to tell. I might even split it in 2 different movies, my Tour de Geants story, or like I might take longer. I think this is one of those races that you don't just run every month, and I really want to do a good job about it. I so happen to be pretty busy with work at the same time, so it's not helpful. But where you can find it will be on my YouTube channel, Running with Simon. I've already posted my vlog format, which is a much more, I'm talking about it and I'm putting a shit ton of footage, not well edited necessarily, but like as a first kind of impression of both Tour du Mont Blanc and Tour de Geants. So there's a lot of stuff there, including the cow eating your trail marker and having a great time, including the snowstorm and me tapping kind of the sign at the mountain pass, like we're alive. That's good. But yeah, so 2-3 weeks from now, both movies should be out.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing your journey with us. We'll look for those premieres when they come out, and we'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your podcast, Brian. That is a great opportunity. I'm very proud. But seriously, thanks, Leanne, for jumping in. Very much appreciate the discussion. Feels great to talk with friend. I know some other people are watching this, but yeah, it makes me at ease, and I'm very happy about that, and sharing and self-promoting, really. That's what it is. Self-promoting, writing my own question. That feels absolutely fantastic. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I always love coming on the show. You guys are great.
Thanks.
Take care.